Welcome to the Transform podcast series, co-produced by the International Labour Organization and socialprotection.org. My name is Abidemi Coker, a consultant passionate about supporting government, civil society, and partners in strengthening our social protection systems in Africa. I will be your host for this 3-episode series, bringing you highlights about Transform, an initiative that is growing across Africa. Transform is a training program that supports efforts of practitioners and leaders to build social protection floors in Africa. In this podcast series, we will present the initiative's achievements 10 years since its inception. We will have conversations with guests from the continent to present the genesis of Transform as an initiative facilitated by multiple international agencies and actors. We will explore how Transform has evolved and impacted the social protection culture in the region, and how it is being institutionalized in several countries. This is our second episode of the Transform podcast. In this episode, we will listen to fascinating discussions on how Transform has promoted a culture of social protection through the experiences of a trainer and practitioner in Mozambique and Zambia. We will begin with an interview I had with Mr. Ivan Oscar, an independent consultant and social protection and policy specialist and master trainer on Transform. We then have an excellent presentation of Zambia's use of the Transform initiative at district level, provided by Ms. Thebuho Kavubya. Thebuho is a district social welfare officer under the Ministry of Community Development and Social Services in Zambia. For our testimonial segment, I got to pick the brain of Mr. Felix Wenge, our Transform coordinator, also the technical officer for Transform and Knowledge Management at the ILO country office for Zambia, Malawi, and Mozambique. You will not want to miss this episode. Enjoy listening. Let's start with a conversation I had with Ivan, who has led multiple trainings as part of the Portuguese-speaking master trainer cohort in Mozambique and Angola. Hey, Ivan. How nice to have you on the podcast today.
Thank you very much, Abidemi. Nice to see you, and thanks for the invitation.
It's really awesome to have you on the podcast because I know that you have been instrumental in the trainings that have taken place in Mozambique and in Angola. What has been the most exciting moment for you as a social protection practitioner and Transform master trainer regarding the impact of the initiative in Mozambique?
Well, let me say that my first contact with Transform was not actually direct the TOT to become a master trainer. I was a participant in one M&D training that was delivered in Malawi. And one of the most excited moments came when I realized that the impact of Transformer in terms of it can be expanded beyond the practitioners of social protection. After that training in Malawi, I immediately came back to Mozambique and together with the colleagues in ILO, led the development of the M&D framework for social protection in Mozambique. So it was a good start. Then I started the journey on master training when we tried to include not only practitioners, but also the journalists. That was when I was presented with this powerful outcome. We trained journalists and broadcasters, and suddenly we had the newspapers, articles, the radio segments, and TV reports became more clear and more accurate, and most of all, more structured, saying that it is a tool that can improve very well not only the practice for the social protection delivering chain, but also can improve the public understanding and even more create constructive pressure on the government to strengthening the systems from different entry points, because we do in Transform try to influence the policies. We try to promote discussions, putting different profiles in the same room to bring discussions. But that element on putting media also inside the Transform community was a huge change in my point of view.
It's quite a unique example as well. And I think, how cool. It's really hard to get that in many countries. So you've created advocates of social protection. You've created advocates of social protection through the media. That's great. So these types of trainings and engagement with these different types of stakeholders, including the government, of course, have any of these trainings, do you feel, have helped shape policy or strategy on social protection in Mozambique?
Yes, I really believe that before we started these many rounds on the level of transform, we had the government working as a silos, if I may say that. And now they look to the social protection system not as a sector, but as a system itself. And it helped shape how the policy is discussed nowadays, how it is built. You know, one of the things that we try to emphasize in Transform is that, yes, we can bring examples of solutions, we can bring examples of how to do this and that, but each country needs to make an assessment in terms of which are the practices that are best fit to that country. And I can say to you that Mozambique, especially from when we start in 2019, 2020 with Transform, we have plenty of assessments, plenty of studies around social protection, delivery chain, and I can see that is a result, is a consequence of Transform.
That's fantastic. It's so important to truly understand what's going on in the country, even if we think we know. But if you don't really go into the detail, go talk to the right people, the communities, and the various stakeholders, then it's a bit of guesswork, right? We know that research is so important. If I may ask one more question, I'm just curious then about how these assessments have been utilized in terms of social protection, design, or delivery. I have to ask that.
That is a very good question. Look, for example, right now, Mozambique is in the process of defining the new social protection strategy. The old one ended last year and they expanded one more year, but this time that we are speaking, they are trying to put together a new strategy. And I can say to you that, for example, the components on shock responsive social protection content are there. You can see clearly, and Mozambique has been facing too many cyclones, too many climate effects since Idai Kenneth. But we do have usage of plenty of the knowledge that is shared and transformed in those assessments and actually end up using here in this moment where they are trying to design the new strategy. So yes, those assessments are used and I really envision a good strategy.
I hope you'll be somehow part of the strategy process. Yeah, and I wish I could read Portuguese so that I can also read the media articles that are coming out from those who were trained by Transform. Fantastic. Thank you so very much, Ivan, for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you.
Let's listen now to Thebuho about the big shift she and other trained transformers initiated and sustained in Zambia. Today, I am excited to share this virtual space with our very own Ms. Thebuho Kavubya, who is a longtime transformer, having been part of the first district application in Zambia. Thebuho is a social welfare officer and has applied many aspects of Transform in her district, where she is responsible for the delivery of social protection services in both rural and urban areas. Welcome, Thebuho. It is such a pleasure to have you on the Transform podcast series today.
Thank you, Abidemi. Thank you for having me on this interview.
So, Thebuho, you would recall that during Transform trainings, there comes that inevitable session when the participants are asked to reflect on the state of social protection in their country. And then on the last day, they're asked how they would envision improving social protection in the country. The perspective in Transform is that we are all leaders in some way in our institutions, and that we can shift or influence certain behaviors, systems, and approaches within our immediate environment. You were very much part of the first district application in Zambia, which took place actually in Kafue district. Do you remember what you envisioned to change back then in 2018 as you completed the Transform training?
Yes, indeed. I received my training in 2018, where I was transformed into a transformer. So, like you've mentioned, by the end of the training, we had to come up with a list of the things that we envisioned to see in terms of social protection and service delivery. So, for me at that time, my take home was mostly on the coordination part, because as we were doing the training, we realized that we're so comfortable with the status quo at that time, where we're working in silos and we're not coordinating as different service providers at the district level. We did not even have like a proper platform where we were coordinating and coming together as different service providers. Transform gave us so much knowledge on different components of social protection service delivery. And just like you mentioned, I've been on the front line of service delivery in ensuring that at least there's that coordination of service delivery at the district level. I led that, and we're able to map all the stakeholders in the district and bringing them together, and also creating a platform for coordination. So we came up with a committee where we were meeting, and we've been meeting just to coordinate the social protection services, and also creating awareness at the district level and community. Through the knowledge that we received under Transform, at least we're able to capacity build the service providers at the community level on social protection service delivery. And also Transform was a prerequisite for the single window initiative that we are piloting as a district. So we needed so much knowledge on social protection, of which Transform at least gave us that knowledge and skill on what social protection is, and also what a functional social protection system is supposed to be.
Yeah, that's amazing. And from what I know, Kafila is actually a bit of a best practice in terms of coordination for improved service delivery. I know that other districts have been learning a lot from you. So well done. What a beautiful piece of work you've been doing for so many years. So Thebuho, I've heard quite a lot about the work that's been done in Kafue district. Can you share with us one example of one of the critical tools that you developed as a result of the Transform training?
So as a district, we developed quite a number of tools. We can probably say that some of our tools have been adopted in the national guidelines for the single window initiative. Yeah. So one of the tools that we developed was the stakeholders matrix that helps map all the stakeholders at the district level, and that translates into a directory. So you're able to have a directory of all the stakeholders offering social protection services at the district level. And also the planning tool. So we have a multi-sectoral planning tool that we use when we come together. Is the stakeholders just sharing what we have planned and consolidating all that, so that we're able to refer to what would have planned, even the time that we do reviews, like every quarter and also at the end of the year.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that. I think we have to let people know how concretely the training has helped to translate into these really important tools for implementing social protection. So we know that social protection in sub-Saharan Africa is mostly focused on social assistance for the most vulnerable in our communities. Could you share an example from Zambia on how a shift in our social protection culture, so to speak, led to improved outcomes for beneficiaries of social protection programs?
The example that I would give is on the expansion on the number of beneficiaries on different programs because of improved systems. So with the proper coordination and also working together, we've seen more people benefit from different programs because we've seen less duplication of efforts in terms of targeting the households. So As we work together in coordination, at least we're able to expand to a number of beneficiaries rather than just targeting the same beneficiaries with the same type of support. So through proper coordination, we are able to refer beneficiaries from one service provider to the other. And also, like I mentioned, we also have service providers at the community level who are doing a very good job, who have also been capacity built. So they are also able to do a lot of case management and referrals. So that has also improved on more people benefiting from services, from the social protection services.
That's so exciting. You know, I have a passion for case management. So it's wonderful to hear that linkage and how the beneficiaries, our communities, are being supported across different projects and programs. I'm now wondering if you've noticed anything different in the way social protection is perceived or even implemented, on the one hand, by policymakers and leaders, but also maybe by managers, from what you can see in your context in Zambia.
From our context in Zambia, I think I've seen a change, especially on the policy part. On the old policy, we're using the poverty relief strategy. And when you look at our new policy now, we've moved to the life cycle approach. And even in the way that we transitioned from the poverty relief now to the life cycle, I think I'm able to relate also to transform. Because, for example, when we're doing the review of the old policy, the team that was taking up that role were mostly trainers and trainees from Transform, which for me was a plus because they understand the different components of social protection. So that was very good. And also on the part of consultation, that one also was very well done because we saw those who were spearheading coming even up to the district level to make consultations. And also on the implementation part, because of the life cycle, I think as a country, we're also looking at a multi-sectoral approach. Yes, because when you look at issues of poverty relief or offering social protection, there are so many players. So we are looking at the multi-sectoral approach where we are trying to work together as different service providers, starting from the national level up to the district level.
It sounds like really you've taken social protection training and the concept quite far in terms of implementation. So kudos to you and to the team in Zambia for such wonderful work. I feel like there's so much we could talk about, but maybe I'll pick that up with you another time. Thank you so much, Thebuho, for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Abidemi, for having me.
For those of you who like statistics or are simply interested in the reach of Transform, we will now hear from Felix, who shares an update on what the initiative has achieved 10 years since its inception. Welcome, Felix, to the Transform podcast. This is a unique experience for me, really, because I get to interview our very own Transform coordinator.
Hi, Abidemi. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Wonderful to talk to you today. You know, I've been itching to hear the numbers. Tell us, how many people and where have we trained with Transform so far on this 10-year journey?
The demand for Transform is only growing. As of today, I can confidently say we've done trainings in Africa around 30 countries, reaching up to 4,000 social protection practitioners. The initiative has grown so big that now we have 3 cohorts of master trainers. That's the people who train, amounting to over 60 in Francophone Africa, Anglophone Africa, and Lusophone Africa. So this is English, French, and Portuguese speaking facilitators that have been capacitated with a Transform unique methodology that I know we've talked about in the previous episode. At this stage, we've also begun to now train local experts who can do trainings within the country. And this number around 42, this is a mixture of civil servants, government officials, and people coming from NGOs and civil society organizations. So the reach is quite magnificent.
Wow, that's really exciting. If we keep going, we can cover each and every country on the continent, right? That's fantastic. But then even as we're growing and we're, training different cohorts of people, can you share a little bit about the feedback? I mean, what are people saying with those who have been trained, as well as the institutions from which they come from? How are they perceiving our training?
In terms of feedback, I can describe feedback at different levels. So there's feedback that comes from the cohort of master trainers, the number that I mentioned across the different language cohorts. This is a team that have grown to become social protection experts on the continent. So the kind of feedback we have from this cohort is that as a result of Transform, continued training, continued interaction with the material, they've become more and more sound in terms of understanding the social protection context in different regions of Africa. The second layer of feedback is the feedback that comes from government institutions, government workers that receive this training. People speak about what they've been able to achieve in terms of changing mindsets, changing the culture of social protection at different levels of government. Some countries have tended to appreciate different modules more. So different regions of Africa will give different types of feedback of how modules like shock responsive social protection has changed the thinking of stakeholders in a country like Chad. But the underlying one is that we have an introductory module. That's basically like the entry point for all people that are practicing social protection. This is a module that grounds people in terms of understanding of terminologies, understanding of the building blocks of social protection. And every time we teach this course, people have always desired that more trainings are undertaken. Everybody we've trained feels that they are being selfish by not opening up these trainings to larger groups. But as we'll speak later, we are also limited by resources. Yeah, I hope I've answered your question.
You definitely answered my question and actually picked up a bit on my next question, which is around the modules, because we know that there's magic in each and every module. There's something that it's meant to bring out and to elaborate on for different levels. The introductory module, like you said, is the base almost, right? We talk about social protection. That's the base of Transform. That's the one that lets us explore all aspects of social protection, programming, policy, and all of that. Are there some modules that are more popular than others? And if they are, why? What makes them stand out more?
Yeah, definitely. So each of the building block that's addressed in the introductory course is also a separate 2 or 3 day course that's addressed in detail. Happy to say that as of now, we actually have 12 what we call in-depth courses. So these are separate from the 5-day course, and they take 2 to 3 days to be delivered. Out of these, there's a newest course, which is extension of coverage to the informal economy. And this one is not directly addressed in the building blocks of social protection under the introductory course. So it came also out of a demand for lack of coverage among Africa's informal economy, which, as we know, accounts for the larger group of the working population. Let me pick the coordination, for instance. So the coordination module has proved to be very useful in contexts where stakeholders are working in silos. You are implementing social protection, but people are pulling in different directions, basically because different ministries and organizations have different mandates. So this course, what it does, firstly, in many countries, it has proven to be the first thing that brings different stakeholders together. I think there's a case in Zambia where they tell you after learning the coordination course, officers at the district level went and came up with some coordination mechanism on their own based on the Transform training. And normally what we recommend for countries is let's start with the introductory module first so that people get to know the fundamentals and the building blocks of social protection. And then we open up for demand for very specific modules. If you have a cash transfer program or if you are starting a new intervention in social protection, we also recommend a course like selection and identification. because it basically delivers to you in a raw form, simplified form, practical form, how to select beneficiaries for maximum impact.
I like that, for maximum impact, and also depending on what you're trying to achieve, right? So that example from Zambia was fantastic. We heard about Zambia earlier on the same podcast. You also said something really interesting about coordination. As a trainer, I remember that on several occasions when we go into the coordination module and we ask people about how they coordinate, we've end up learning that actually most of us are simply networking, because people will say, oh, we coordinate with them. And we ask, okay, how do you do that? What does that mean in practice? And you'll find that they simply invite each other to meetings. So they get together, they have a meeting, they discuss issues, and then everybody goes back and does whatever they were doing. And then they meet again at some point. So they were not always collaborating and coordinating, like really using resources together, planning together, things like that. So I think the coordination one, I'm not surprised that it comes out top, because that's been always a critical piece that we have seen.
One thing we've learned over time is that in different countries, you have ministries, you have departments, you have social security schemes and all that. And each of these tend to guard what they do. They tend to be very territorial in terms of how they do the work. But what Transform does, there's a brilliant space in the training called the social protection web. This is like my favorite part of Transform.
Yeah.
And the participants are taught to link these different functionalities, these different blocks, to link them across the social protection web. That's one of the most life-changing aspects of Transform from my observation, because it's like a eureka for many people to say, okay. So Transform becomes a platform where people, some for the first time, coming together, and the energy that's built in the room. And when people go back, they actually know better, not only to network, but to create synergies to advance the work.
I love it. But then, Transform, we're saying that Transform has come a long way, right? That whole 10-year journey that the initiative has been on. I'm just curious to hear from you. How do we go about updating these different modules? Surely they're not the same as they were 10 years ago, or maybe even 5 years ago. Could you briefly just share how that works, how we're keeping up with the times as things are evolving in the social protection and other sectors?
So like you rightly put, the social protection context is very dynamic. It's not static. Things change over time. Perceptions change also. New knowledge come on board. Like in the past, people would talk about double dipping in social protection. Now, terms like that are evolving into cash plus. Transform is actually a community of social protection experts sitting in different places. Transform is a community of social protection implementers, policy designers, sitting in different places. And where they are attentive to trends, they are attentive to new knowledge. So here's the thing. In the organization of Transform, we have what we call an advisor group. So the advisor group is basically made up of different social protection experts. Some members include master trainers. We have heads of social protection agencies and institutions. We have academics in universities. And that advisor group is the lead in terms of the technical content of Transform. So this is a group of people who must recommend what should change, who must recommend what's evolving, and that needs to be reflected in how the lessons are delivered, in how the content is packaged and designed. I'm going to give you an example, actually. You see, in the past, climate change wasn't something you discussed in social protection. If there was a flood and people were left homeless, there was an emergency intervention that, people were supported and all. But over time, as these shocks show consistency in how they happen, it triggers a thinking to say that perhaps we need social protection systems that are not only reacting to these shocks, but actually they live ready for what can happen. So you have terms coming on the platforms like shock responsive social protection. You are now encouraging social protection systems that respond to shocks, not as an emergency, but as something that is expected that it can occur anytime. So through the network that I mentioned, these recommendations are now made to the hub to say, I think we need to reflect this in the courses. So in the past 12 months, we just did this. The anchor course that I'm talking about, the introductory social protection course, now has incorporated shock responsive social protection. The shock responsive social protection module is now going to have 4 sub modules. Also, we are now going to have a day that basically speaks about conflict sensitivity, social protection in conflict settings. Okay, so that's a shock. All those are shocks, but they're just different types of shocks caused by different factors. Then we also have one that's basically for protracted situations of asylum seekers and refugees. We also feel that social protection systems should be designed ready to respond to those contexts. So not to speak for too long, Abidemi, we have a structure. We have an advisor group whose membership is diverse people working in different sectors of social protection who are always raising flags. And as long as we find support and thanks to our donors, we are able to embark on revisions from time to time.
I think our listeners will be very happy to hear that. I'm very thrilled to hear about shock responsive, not just looking at it from one perspective, but really taking into account the different types of shocks that we've seen on the continent. And especially around climate change, we know that there are many factors that contribute to them. And obviously, drought may cause long-term displacement even. So really, really exciting.
I personally see Transform as extremely strategic in the advancement of social protection systems in Africa. And, Transform is only growing. I promise you, the demand is just overwhelming now.
And I remember a colleague when we were talking about how do we really raise the bar and improve capacity of social protection practitioners in Zambia specifically some years ago. And that colleague was always advocating for human resources for social protection. He termed it something like how you have the HRH, or the human resources for health in the health sector. So Transform could really be that answer for many African governments and partners to build capacity and a strong culture of social protection at all levels, as we have discussed today. So thank you, Felix, for joining us on this segment.
Thanks, Abidemi. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for joining us for the second episode of the Transform podcast series. In our third episode, we will shine a spotlight on Malawi and Nigeria, where institutionalization is at the center of the vision for building social protection systems. They provide 2 different approaches to learn from. Don't miss it. Transform is an interagency initiative coordinated by the International Labour Organization. The Transform Hub is funded by Irish Aid and is based in Zambia. You can learn more about Transform and its partners, reach out to the Hub, and explore the training materials on the website transformsp.org.